Warning. The following podcast novel, based on a true story, contains sex, violence, violent sex, sexualized violence, nonsense, surrealism, silliness, metaphor, and radical notions the modern mind may find distasteful. However, the knowledge contained in these words is necessary for your survival. Therefore, listener discretion is not advised. Welcome to The Horde by Patrick Scafito, a Storyteller Chronicles novel. And now, Episode 1. The road to truth is long, and lined the entire way with annoying bastards, said Alexander Jablokov. Chapter 1. Meetings on the Road. The image I viewed was more photograph than vision. Berdan stood still, face masked by the setting sun and his wind-whipped hair, left foot poised to be raised, right foot steadying itself after recently falling. It wasn't movement, but rather the impression of movement, a constant rate of step after step after step, carrying him somewhere beyond the distant edge of that still world I barely knew, yet named Farrakhan. Berdan walked the road with dusty wind to his left and desert sun to his right. The world through which he moved was no more than a cadaver, lifeless and barren, with a single black asphalt line of the road marking a difference between beginning and end. His pace was steady, foot by foot by foot, till he reached whatever far-off credulous destination held firm in his thoughts. This was my first dream of him. I hovered perhaps 10 or 20 feet overhead, suspended by the immobility of Farrakhan's quiescent seasons. I focused in on his sphinx-like face, pale like a Tolkien elf, all pointed and regal, with the shadows of refined decisions visible in the etchings of his azure retina, while his vacant gaze grasped at the equally empty horizon. His eyes were without color. His were eyes of the dead. I turned my head and behind saw specks of black and gray begin to obscure the sky. The storm would be upon him soon and upon him only. The folds and lumps of the cloudy mass were swollen with the milk of electrical rumbling that leaked for every cry of the wind. With a flash, time became extant and I was falling. By reflex or a will other than my own, my wings caught on the jagged air currents of this dying infant planet, slowed by no trees or mountains as they reached out to the cloud behind him. The sun once more began its steady retreat beyond the horizon, and the sky blackened as the storm obscured the young moon, a pale infant devoured, never once able to peek out from the folds of the womb of the eastern skyline before being swallowed by the storm's endless gullet of despair. Raindrops burrowed their refuge like bullet holes in the sand, but merely bounced off the asphalt under his feet. He paid no attention to the nascent droplets, for once more, Berdan walked the road. Behind him a second figure now stood, similarly clad in the long jet cloaks of the Darkling, with tensing membranes of flesh replacing any fur or nylon I might have recognized. Berdan's was ornate with needlework intended as if in the decades he had spent pacing the road's latitudinal curvature, never once had he met a wound he could not sew. The other's was frayed and ripped, not even worthy of a thrift store purchased or the neediest of freeganism, barely more than a heavy rag, yet both hid the faces of the wearers well, with shadow and hair and black hoods pulled low. "Wait," the figure said in a voice made staccato by gasping and hissing, as if someone had poked toothpick holes in its windpipe. "I have no wish to talk to dead playthings." And despite his cold-blooded tone and the harsh cliffs of his eyes that any feelings might leap from in despair, he had stopped and turned slightly. Was he curious? I asked myself. Did he recognize the voice? "Cyrac will come. You move too slowly." The figure's plaintive voice caught on the whistle of the last word and choked it into a growl. Berdan eased a sword the length of his arm from the sheath on his back. Its pommel was a technical nightmare of tiny lines of power I had no interest in tracing, yet to the touch it would seem smooth as the side of a space shuttle, its blade a curved bow glowing slightly in the darkness, either reflecting or answering the lightning crashes of the storm. I could smell power on the wind. You shouldn't have come after me. The last Darkling Hunter he sent won't heal even with the passage of 1,000 years. Whoever you were, however he tempted you, whatever he promised you, I'm in no mood to deal with you. I come to warn. Its voice sounded more like wind through absent trees than an attempt at human language. I desire... Your desires are meaningless to me, and the air stinks with the freshness of your rot. Go back to your master or die here again. Beneath the cloak, lines of wind marked where his shirt strained against tense arm muscles, unexpectedly defined for the fairness of his face, and almost unwanted by the body that held them. You must listen, it begged. It is no longer behind you. You must come back to him. You must choose. Berdan's feet pushed him forward off the black rock of the road, his blade seeking the hunter's chest. Instead, it found only empty cloak. Whatever the hunter had been beneath the garment was now vapor, leaving only a fluttering tatter slowly falling to the ground to be lost in the rainwater that pooled in the road cracks and rioted the surrounding desert to mud and mayhem. Berdan resumed his footsteps, only now under the cover of rain, cloud, and memories he would not let me share. And it made no sense to me whatsoever. The dream did not scare me. It did not fill me with a profound sense of dread. In fact, until now, all it had done was be forgotten. Later on, the second time, as I rolled over and resisted opening my eyes, as I felt Tanya's warm chest cuddle close to me after the blankets had wrapped themselves around me in my spasmodic sleep, there was more. This time, there was meaning. I readjusted and covered her, hoping she wouldn't shift her body away, now having gotten her share of the sheets. I spent the night staring at the ceiling. I wasn't scared to sleep, I really wasn't. I just had no desire to. It was his eyes, I think. I saw that blankness often enough, set in the skull of every man and woman I met in the waking world. I had no wish to let those eyes follow me to my dreams. In the days and weeks that followed the first dream, I did not think of it at all. I thought of finding a job and of what kind of job I could find that would let me make use of my 5-year English degree with 2 semesters off. I thought of proposing marriage to Tanya, but, watching her eyes as she slept and avoiding them when she woke, I thought better of it. Neither of us had money or careers. I thought about life as an adult, how boring it was, eating and bills and sleeping and bills and television and working part-time at the local giant. I thought about how I knew all about the great dairy sales before anyone else, and how complete the knowledge of discount milk and eggs made my life. I thought about the choices I had, though I didn't think about them much, or think much at all, really. Mostly I just lived and regretted. Then came the second dream. Berdan walked into a bar. Hoping for a joke, I received my first sign of civilization on the blasted world of Farrakhan, a mishmash of the modern and medieval, all decayed and rusting from lack of care. Neon signs hung in moldy windows, either long burnt out or unpowered, declaring the bar open for the living to enjoy. The 20 or 30 patrons, all male, carried iron bars with ends hammered into points, or with heavy weights welded onto one end, like a Renaissance fair for the down and out. They wore tunics and oil-stained pantaloons and had dirt and grease under their tawny fingernails. The bar was a long white shelf, like something you might find at IKEA if you had left it in the middle of a seedy dive bar in the city for a couple of centuries to be used as an ashtray. Behind it stood 2 middle-aged men, balding in patches with mirrored toupees that might be the most expensive things in the room. One polished glasses with little attention to sanitary practices, while the other rummaged in a room-temperature chest fridge, covered in bronze patches of oxidation, and filled with dry ice and chilled hunks of meat that, again, reminded me of a Renaissance fair as put on by a soup kitchen. The man in the fridge chose one specimen, one appearing more bone and sinew than meat, and slammed it down on a black stone plate as Berdan entered. The lone walker chose an abandoned table in the corner of the room, a trench of empty seats and tables between him and the crowd, and stored his body in an old washed-out wooden chair. He sat for a while, letting his muscles rest, and as he passed through time, a lone musician came out on stage with a guitar and began plucking out some melody I knew, but couldn't recall. Berdan paid it no care and let his mind flow back to the last town he had seen. Had it been weeks? Months? All he recalled was that it had been the one that Myra had chosen to settle in, to give up and give in to the ruin of time and peace. She was probably dead by now. consumed by the Horde, or maybe being tortured by Cyrac for giggles. I didn't care then. I don't care now. People are lazy, selfish, and stupid, so why should I bother to care about every person? Any person I meet along the road who chooses their own death. As he reclined in the wooden chair in violation of every warning I had been given by my grade school teachers, he once more reviewed his mantra, the words that kept him moving since the time he had first put heel to toe on the road. I did it, he said, so I'll fix it. I am best when alone, and best when I do not let myself feel a thing. I'll fix it myself. He repeated it under his breath like a promise till a waitress interrupted him, saying, "Order a drink?" He stared at her for a moment, sizing her up, forgetting where he was as one hand reached over his shoulder to the hilt of his blade. He stopped, his eyes darkening as memory poured over the offerings a place like this might have. Harsh liquor from local distilleries, perhaps blood snaked out of hanging animals to collect in pools in a small tin. The myriad ways one can wring liquid from the meat of the earth and convert it into energy and poison, and then he said, "Milk." Yes, milk. I have no head for spirits. I have enough with the ones that chase me. He managed a smile that most children would have associated with the evil of strangers, and she edged backward, promising to see what she could find for him. It seemed ashamed to me. She was cute, and I think he had just tried to tell a friendly joke. Later, Berdan sipped seltzer to settle his stomach and waited on one of the legs of meat as he slipped into a fugue not unlike the one from which I watched him. Superimposed over the images of him sitting at the table, I watched as he wandered through marble corridors, asymmetrical and off-kilter, filled with the lilting melodies of a dozen competing harpsichords. Every time he seemed to have steadied on the cold floor the next step through the hallway off to a drunken angle, catching his feet in a forced clumsiness. Faceless statues of vaguely human shapes surrounded each corridor, and he explored them till his eyes settled on one, the only one with human features, but with only eyes visible, the rest of the face obscured by a thin sheet of marble material I could not identify, maybe a depiction of a leather mask. Berdan stood, eyes even with the statue as the smell of burning wet hair rose on a sudden gust through the hallways. The report of outcries and metal striking metal came in counterpoint to the harpsichords, racing in a crescendo till each beat beat at the listener, trying to dominate his senses. I wanted out. I longed for the safety of my own dreams and had no desire to share his, and the cracks of the walls flowed with the light of the bar as the harpsichords were absorbed by the voice of one of the balding men shaking Berdan awake. "Wake up, man," he said. "We have to run." Berdan refocused back to my dream, and the screams grew louder, more vivid, while the wet burning smell grew in my snout. I heard the hammering raindrops on the roof of the bar and the symphonic chorus of people wailing in pain from abyssal torture. There were gunshots and the clicking of strange tongues and a unified groan responding to the ordered clanking of strange machines, sounds that followed me even back to the world I fled to, where I woke Tanya with my furious whimpering of, "It's come! It's come! How could you lead it there? It's come!" I was twisted fetal, like a young child having a nightmare. I must have been crying, though I don't remember if I was. She had wrapped herself around me, a human blanket gently stroking my temples as she whispered, "It's just a dream. It's gone now." She held me for the rest of the night until I calmed down and the crying ceased, while I prayed for her to be right. I looked back at that night with a detachment that I once saved for my dreams. It was scary, yes, and sad, but happening to someone else, some other me. As I watched that Terry curl in his bed and weep, I know the only words he hears are Berdan's, not Tanya's. Looking at the bartender and with full knowledge of who had led the horrors there, Berdan said, "The only one I want is I. The time they take devouring your homes and absorbing your families will give me valuable days of progress. I won't waste it." He walked out into the rain and smoke, leaving the stunned man who had cared to stop and save him. Berdan smiled at the blackened sky that would soon be his alone, and then once more, Berdan walked the road. The abuse dies in a day, but the denial slays the life of the people, entombs the hope of the race, said Charles Bradlaugh. Chapter 2. Fate Pulls. I did not sleep that night and would not for some nights after. I drank coffee and went back on caffeine pills to stay in motion. At work, I couldn't do much of anything but stock shelves and run the cash register. I would occasionally sit down at my archaic 1940s Smith Corona to work on an article about modern disaffection or some other equally tepid topic. Something both deep and vacuous at once. But I could never gather enough concentration. 3 days later, my mind was begging for rest, and poor Tanya was begging for my company. "I hate sleeping alone," she'd say plaintively. "Why won't you come to bed?" I couldn't explain the dread I felt in those dreams, the tangible fear that went deeper than any common nightmare. She hid my car keys in the jar of treats once intended for some promised future pet that never quite happened. Her fear of my growing clumsiness forced me to ride the bus to Giant. At the supermarket, I cashiered slowly and was constantly pressing the wrong keys. Segerson, my manager, quickly grew sick of seeing my customers' faces of crimson anger and covert frustration each time my fingers keyed in the code for avocados when I meant to ring up breakfast cereal. He ended up leaving a pair of register keys with Chris, one lane over, so someone else could handle Terry the mental invalid requiring so many voided transactions. Someone else could toss the moments I traded for dimes, each transaction I officiated, my life's work, into the void. However, when Tanya cried because I wouldn't join her in bed, I broke down and returned once more to her side. I couldn't bear to make her sad, and I missed her. I had plenty of time to observe the shadows as they molded themselves into puppets and witches on the ceiling. Plenty of time till sleep would find me, and I would find Berdand, standing in the same room where I had left him days ago. He was staring through me at something. Turning, I saw 2 large dogs inside the bar, stalking near the doorway. Their fur was a blood-covered ash gray and eyes bloodshot pink oozing pus and fury as their vision crawled the room. One mouth was dripping crimson foam while a half-chewed leg dangled from the other. Tracing their silhouettes, my eyes came to where their heads fused at the shoulder, 2 taut necks craning against each other, pulling the muscled sponge of blood and hair in split directions, even as it slowly stepped its way to Berdand. Most of the patrons were clogging a second artery behind him towards the front of the stage. From the constant damp fire smell and the continued tinnital screams of agony from outside, I somehow doubted they would be safe even if that particular bit of egress succeeded. Better to run towards a faint chance of survival than die without a struggle, they seemed to say with their frenzied movements. I wondered, unsure. The fur-framed eyes of the dogs glared at Berdand, their pupils turning yellow with pattern recognition, narrowing down and waiting for him to step forward toward the door they blocked. I moved. I had no wish to be between them should violence occur, but they gave me no attention. Berdand's hand snuck beneath his coat and quickly re-emerged bearing fire as the dogs fell to the floor, bleeding from tiny flechette scrapes now liberally sprinkled across their shared back and flanks. Even as the body struggled to stand, its 2 heads growled in anger and in frustration at Berdand and at each other. I saw the glint of steel and the smoke pouring from the twin objects in his hands. He had shot them with 2 boxy black revolvers, fogging the room with arcane debris, grips held tightly in his gloved palms. He pulled each trigger twice more, once for each head, and then reloaded the strange firearms. "Demon wolves," he said to himself. "That means the Horde is already upon this town. I must move." "So you know what those mule schmutz are?" Berdand turned to face the speaker, the guitar player from earlier. Noting this person's general affect of unimportance, Berdand turned away. "Oren." The man shoved 2 fingers in Berdand's face in a gesture I did not recognize. "Pleased to meet you. You look like a man who could use some assistance, so let's get moving." Berdand turned to stare at him, eyebrows scrunching towards each other. "What? Why are you talking to me?" "I'd love to tell you my life story, and the strange sequence of uncanny hijinks that has led me to be in this very tavern with you at the exact moment some sort of monstrous attack on humanity came to town, so that we can justly and thusly identify the fustionodes that have entwined us together in a web of fate and heroism, so that you could find a way to stoically tolerate my impetuous presence. But honestly, sir, half the people in the town are on fire and the other half are half-eaten, so we have to get moving or we'll barely have half a chance." Berdand blinked. The man had said those words without taking a breath and in less than a quarter minute. "Yes, I know, I amaze myself," the man said to Berdand's silence. "I assure you, though, I am much quicker with my tongue than my sword, so I highly suggest you cease ceasing and cede movement." Berdand paused. "No one really talks like that. And your suggestion that you could be of aid to me? Failure." Berdand's eyes remained still, sick of one more clinging to hope to him as if he was some kind of hero with a lifeline to save them from the Horde. To Berdan, I knew, his was a mission of focus, not defense of the innocent lives along the way. Time slowed once more, and Orin's mouth hung open mid-protest. As I peered closely, I could see the unflossed remnants of his last meal clinging to his teeth. His brown hair was cut to his shoulders and was free of the tangles and dirt clinging to every other patron's scalp. His skin was light, possibly recently cleaned, in direct opposition to what seemed to be a local ban on bathing that even stretched to include the seemingly foreign Berdan. His clothes were plain, a jerkin I'd once seen at Ren Fair, cloth pants, and a cross-shoulder sling of leather holding his guitar. There were calluses on the tips of his fingers, the tiny peeling marks of a guitar player who could stand to practice more consistently. A similarly calloused line lay where left thumb met left hand, and I realized it might be from wielding what hung unsheathed from a loop on his belt, a dented blade no pawnshop in Fairfax would bother to purchase. The motionless time hurt my mind, the front of my head ached like a brain freeze from a slushie, the immobile moments chilling my thoughts and forcing me to note the tiniest inconsistencies and insignificant details as if they mattered. Couldn't Orin see Berdan was fine on his own? That he didn't need help or prying concern, let alone a trembling sidekick of a lackey that couldn't even take care of herself? Himself? It was my dream, though, and I knew what I had to do to free myself from this melodrama and lack of motion. I woke up. Day had already risen, but I did not know what day it was. Not sleeping had twisted my perceptions of the flow of time. Clocks would run in circles strangely, first one way then the other. I went through each hour twice, forwards and backwards, its meaning changing on each experiential retread. My senses filled with the smell of Tanya's brewed coffee. Good. I needed something to wake me up. I crawled out from my fugue and brain stumbled in the kitchen, giving her a weak smile as I tried to blame anything I could. Morning, maybe. You don't look so hot, she said, eyes crimson with worried frustration. Thanks, I blinked. Long night. I took a chipped CIA mug from the cabinet, filled it black, and sat at the only table we owned. I drooped, barely mobile. She looked at me quizzically, curling her eyebrows, and said, Don't you need something? I let out a soft chuckle. Oh, sure, I said, I do. So do you. Couldn't remember when I had last eaten, and Tanya clearly wasn't eating now. I think I had worked closing shift last night. That might have been last week. I went to the pantry to find some Cheerios in a bowl. The date on the box seemed off, seasons old. Were they still good? I couldn't recall buying them, so I stared, searching for the memory. Terry, she said, and gave me the look I always dreaded, the one where her lips bulge slightly because she's biting the inside of her mouth while her eyes shift inches to the left in an abrupt refusal to meet my own. I think you need help. I'm not going to call my mom for any more money. My life is stable enough from working at the store till I find a good one. A good job, I mean. It's just frustration, and you know it. And there's that agent that was interested in my script, too. Things are fine. I stood, voice harsh with mourning, yelling through the sleep in morning hoarseness. That's not what I meant. Her denial sparked the kindling of my rage. The sleeping problems you've had, forgetting to eat, that dream? My skin stilled as much as the clock on Farrakhan. I hadn't told her about the dream. And there's other things. I think maybe you could afford to see a counselor. She trailed off. Are you saying I'm crazy? Just because I've been a bit off in my sleeping lately? I'm not crazy. My blood began to warm behind my frosty face. I could feel it flowing into my heart and brain, turning the bad parts liquid and the good parts vapor, messing with my thoughts. I wish she would stop trying to fix me, just like my mother. My normal, natural feelings aren't a problem for someone to solve. I knew I wasn't crazy. That's why I spent that morning yelling. That's why I regret that final morning. Maybe back then, with some patient understanding of what she was trying to say, I could have stopped what was to come, but patient understanding needs to flow both ways, and she wasn't listening to me either. I kept wishing for her to just shut up. I can't believe this. You know how many times Mom sent me to a shrink and how many times they sent me back saying, Your son is perfectly normal. I don't need this. I slammed my bald fingers on the tabletop, spilling Cheerios across the floor. That's not what I meant. Her denial sparked the kindling of my rage. The sleeping problems you've had, forgetting to eat, that dream. My skin stilled as much as the clock on Farrakhan. I hadn't told her about the dream. And there's other things. I think maybe you could afford to see a counselor. She trailed off. I'm not going to call my mom for any more money. My life is stable enough from working at the store till I find a good one. A good job, I mean. It's just frustration, and you know it. And there's that agent who was interested in my script, too. Things are fine. I stood, voice harsh with mourning, yelling through the sleep in morning hoarseness. "Terry," she said, and gave me the look I always dreaded. The one where her lips bulge slightly because she's biting the inside of her mouth while her eyes shift inches to the left in an abrupt refusal to meet my own. "I think you might need help." I let out a soft chuckle. "Oh, sure," I said. "I do. And so do you." I couldn't remember when I had last eaten. I couldn't remember when I had last slept. I couldn't remember anything. And I still have trouble facing what came next. Nobody controls his own life. The best you can do is choose to be controlled by good people, by people who love you, said Orson Scott Card in Ender's Game. Chapter 3. Puppets. Tanya went to work early that morning, no words or glances exchanged at the door. Instead of answering me, she'll be answering phones. Normally she goes in around noon, but work is methodical, predictable. She can manipulate the buttons and know what to expect, not like in our tangled cat's cradle of a relationship. Switchboard may be a crap job, but it is the same dull, thudding crap that never truly grabs your attention. Just reminds you from the background that you could have been doing something more. It's easy enough to ignore. I used to do it too, see, but I couldn't handle getting paid to talk to people I never knew, to care about their life stories for no more than 3 minutes, then send them away, never to be heard from again, never knowing if my efforts had resulted in a solved problem or just one more transferred call. There is less emotional investment in bagging groceries. Emotions are dangerous things. For the past many years, both her and I had sought safety to the exclusion of all else, including and especially emotion, looking for a tiny leash pulling us to the future, tangling us together, barely able to tell our two frames apart at times. I wish I had asked Tanya what day it was before she left. I looked at my calendar on the wall. If Tuesday, my day was free. If Wednesday, I was late. There was no way to fix the world I lived in, just like nothing either Tanya or I had said between the arguments and the door not quite slamming could fix the things that had spilled out of our darker natures through our mouths. The milk was spilled, I suppose, and soaking into the carpet, and there was nothing left to do but weep for its loss. The calendar reminded me of a third possibility, that I had many hours before the start of a shift, assuming my eyes were even tethered to the right week. I couldn't solve the problem of work, and it would not leave me alone. It dogged my every step and mouthed temptations like health insurance and seniority at me in ways that made me shudder and nauseate when I looked at the longtime veterans, still gleefully weighing the bags of apples for the blank-eyed people every week. Couldn't solve the problem of Tanya. We had what everyone wanted. We lived together. We were in love. We both worked. Our lives were stable, slowly laying the right track. More so once we find real adult jobs instead of working like the college kids we were 3 years ago. We were hopeless in so many ways. Just living out our days till one of us either married the other or got so fed up that the equilibrium shifted. I lay in bed, taking a moment to actively not set the alarm before pulling her pink fuzzy blankets over my head, imagining the warmth that had lain here with me not 3 hours prior. Asleep, we were perfect. Our bodies' jigsaw pieces snugly fit together, spoons, forks, our shapes matched and clutched. There was no space between the comforting embrace of our bodies. No clumsiness, no pain. In our days, we walked around bumping into each other like we were sleepwalking zombies, even though there was nothing we wanted more than to give each other the kind of love that burned away all the strings that make us dance to the world's insane music. In a ball waiting for sleep, waiting to let the flashes of good times between us slide show my mind. I felt my body fall through the bed to the distant otherworld of dreams. But then engines roared outside the window, blades slicing through grass, loud cursing in El Salvadorian. I did not need to peek through the blinds to recognize the landlord's groundskeepers working their way diligently down the block with no respect for those of us who just want to sleep till noon. I grasped the pillow, hoping that somehow it would drag me under the tide of sleep, but the noise was constant till I could almost smell the gasoline of their machines. I can't fix work. I can't fix Tanya. Please, God, just let me fix sleep. And that's when God answered. You could kill them all, he said. Break the seal and all your problems are solved. You need not even lift a finger to make the world dangle from your whims. Pillow wrapped around my head, keeping the voice at bay, hoping I was having some sick nightmare that I wasn't really hearing voices, yet still I heard, "You could be free, Terry. All you have to do is cut the strings, the ones that hold you back." It was insane. It had to be. My mind, sleep-deprived, still drunk from its first taste of turning off in days, overreacting to the grinding gears of lawn care equipment. Earplugs shoved tightly into my aural canals blocked the noise of manual labor, and whatever the voice had been, it let me drift off to dreamland, yet still, I felt it breathing at my side, ravenously intangible, holding me close where Tanya's body should have been. I missed her body, sheltering me, protecting me, keeping them away. I missed the steady thumping of her heart. This replacement simulacrum only served to make my skin frost over even as it marionetted my tossing body. But there was a face I knew in sleep, familiar in the flickering light of the bar. I could see Berdan preparing to leave. The heavy breathing of the voice was in the background, barely audible over the noise of the violence destroying the town, and I let the words of the two men take my attention. "I don't have time for this," Berdan said. "Leave me alone." "Seriously? It's dangerous out there. Monsters all over the place, possibly looters, maybe crazy people, who knows? I can fight. I have a sword right here. Let me watch your back." Oren's face spread wide in an attempt at a winning smile, one that clearly said, "Please watch my back and maybe I'll live." He ended up sounding like a novice con man from a made-for-TV movie. For all his theatrics earlier, he was as scared of the doom devouring the other denizens of this nowhere town. Now nothing. Berdan listened, then turned and took another step toward the exit, feet passing by the bodies of wolves and barkeep as if they didn't even exist in his world of perception. Harsh. Listen, fate can decide. Oren nimbly sidestepped the bodies and proffered 2 dice to Berdan, one oversized and blood red, the other covered in Rorschach markings coalescing only vaguely into numerals. "You pick. You roll higher and I'll leave you alone. I win. We at least help each other get out of town." I laughed at how desperate he was. All his powers of persuasion having failed, he came down to pure chance. Maybe luck will help them escape from the Horde itself if he was as lucky as he hoped. Luck was always good for me, if not for Tanya. Berdan spoke without turning. "I have no desire to give my decisions to dice. Take your schemes elsewhere. Try your cheating on the Horde if you wish." With an exaggerated frown, Oren said, "You try to be nice to a total stranger and everyone thinks you're a cheat. The world is a cruel place." He began to fidget with a small yellow and black charred stone inset with slight glows of blue light. "Flip a coin? Maybe your coin? No way I can cheat then, it'll be fair. Even. He sounded like Yogi Bear. Berdan's eyes narrowed on the necklace. "You stole that, didn't you?" "Some poor alchemist, a knife in his back. Repayment for trusting you." "Of course! Well, the stealing part, not the killing. I have standards. Only knives in the front. You don't survive this town without a touch of the take-what-you-need disease, but I assure you he was well alive when I last saw him." Oren's voice blackened. "But given the speed the Devourer has made, I doubt anyone back there still lives. Please, flip. Heads, I'm with you for now. Tails will go our own way like Fleetwood Mac and try not to die too much. Either way, resolved and moving on, everybody happy. Well, everybody but me if I lose, of course." From a small change purse, Berdan drew out what looked like a solid gold quarter. Only the eagle had 3 heads, and instead of George Washington, there was a giant leaning tower. "If it will let me be rid of you quickly, all the better. I can't have you whining all the way to the edge of town. It'd surely get us caught." Oren frowned. "That's not a weighted coin, is it? I've never seen one like it. I can't abide a cheater," he joked. "It's just from somewhere far away, somewhere no one goes anymore. Now, let's pray for Tails." Oren frowned as Berdan flipped the coin and watched it spin. I already knew the outcome before it landed. Was I predicting the path things would take, or influencing the outcome of my dream? I don't know, but the voice in the background growled out a whisper. "Both, Terry." Berdan's face was still as he showed the coin to Oren. No emotion. "Tails, goodbye." Without a moment of politeness, Berdan was out the door. Oren stared at his outline, an expression of deep hopelessness hollowing out his face for a moment. And then, with an act of will, he refilled his features with color. "Well, that sucked," he said, and looked in the direction that the screams came from, hoping the burning and fighting hadn't yet reached this part of town. "No point in letting time go to waste. Time to depart." And he did just that, after emptying the cash box behind the counter and scavenging what food he could carry from the icebox. He saw no point in letting anything else go to waste either, I supposed. It was strange to see two men so unaffected by the carnage surrounding them. Their mutual apathy to the music of butchery playing outside on the street was infectious, empowering. They blocked out the cries of the victims, and it helped me block out the cries of gas motors outside in the waking world, and the quieter cries of the internal. They could see the damage done by all that had passed between Tanya and I this morning. Berdan's pilgrimage seemed to be only about escaping, so I turned to follow him wherever it may lead me. Escape was a flavor I yearned to taste. When I finally caught up with him, his pace had slowed and his legs trembled with the simple effort of moving forward once more. I could hear his whispered mantra repeated. "There's nothing you could do. There's nothing that you can do. There's nothing you could do. There's nothing that you can do." I was relying on his strength, his disaffection, and this suggested cracks I had no desire to see in the mask he wore. This moment of transparency passed, and once more he quickened, so much so that I had to run to keep up with him. How could such a man, clad in heavy clothes and armed, move so quickly without even the faintest hint of a breaking sweat? It seemed impossible. He moved so fast that it seemed he might soon escape the raindrops awaiting their call to throw themselves from overhead. I could see the edge of the decrepit town, what remained up ahead. I was glad for his escape, my proxy in this world, picking his way through the wreckage 1 foot in front of the other, how I tiptoed through the remains of my relationship with Tanya. And we could both still hear the victims, the dying, devoured by whatever sorts of monstrosities mastered the dogs of the Horde. We made no effort to clean or repair as we went, and I challenged him in ways I could not challenge myself. "Why do you let it die? Why don't you try to fix it?" "There is nothing I can do against the might of the Horde," he whispered, either to himself or to me, I could not tell which. "Not yet. But I am so close. So close." He clutched himself to stop shivers no one could see if they were not watching with the clarity of a dragon's eyes, to still his quivering heart and limbs, but once more he walked the road to wherever it was bringing him. On the edge of town, the storm caught up with us, the rain that pummeled Berdan like an enraged boxer with a grudge and a taste for blood. Lightning began to fall violently around us, setting the cottages of the poor on the edge of town aflame, their owners long dead, devoured, or departed. I was grateful for the light. I could rely on my own eyes instead of the shards of the crystal dragon through which I observed the fair Canian landscape. Up ahead, I could see a figure waiting for Berdan. Though it was only the second time I had seen it, I knew it well. "Cyrac calls for..." The darkling hunter's familiar voice paused as if trying to remember a word. "Blood." It was a sentence unto itself. "Out of the way, puppet. I'm almost done with my journey, and there is no way you or your master will stop me." Berdan continued to advance, affecting indifference over aggression. He held no weapons, and moved as if the creature was not even there to obstruct his progress. "I have..." The hunter let out a yelp of pain, a whipped dog in human skin. "No." It pulled the same heat-scarred sword from whatever shadow held it, and aimed to embrace Berdan between its edge and the sky. "Blood," it cried in its ghastly hollow voice, clumsily, like an actor unfamiliar with their lines. Both revolvers were suddenly in Berdan's hands and blazing, filling the hunter's cloak with lead. I could see no blood through the holes in the coat. What was this? Some sort of zombie? The cloak flew back from the force of the bullets, and for a moment I wondered if the disturbing creature had been so easily overcome. But no, the cloak floated to the ground empty, and the hunter had vanished. Berdan holstered his pistols and handed his sword. I could see no nearby imminent threat. What was he waiting for? This was his chance to run. The hunter appeared from behind him, between Berdan and I, obscuring my view. When had it moved? I heard the sound of metal on metal, and the hunter was flung to the ground. Berdan held his blade over the monstrosity without effort as I moved in for a closer look. As fast as it was, Berdan had been faster. I think it had been human once, though the flesh was decayed. In parts leprous, in parts moldy, and others just missing completely. It appeared to be female, for it had a left breast, but there was a gaping hole where its twin should have been, through which I could see the ground. I could not comprehend the face till the lightning spread across the sky once more. The face, unlike the rest of the body, was perfect, preserved. The face of a lovely exotic girl, the kind I found beautiful in Bollywood movies, but had never once tried to date in real life. The face almost made up for the body. If only they could be separated and given more appropriate partners. A strange and sick thought I realized as soon as it had passed through my head. It would be a long time before I realized, in that moment, I had already made a plan for this beautiful, hideous thing, despite not even knowing the tools soon to be thrust into my hands. Berdan, though, leaped back from the hunter in fright, body shaking. "No," he said, voice threatening to quiver but holding fast to a pretense of impassivity. "Not you, Myra." The girl's movements suddenly stiffened, as if a clumsy master now directed her dance, and a calm, sinister laugh of a voice came from what had once been her mouth. "Yes, it is your lovely Myra. She is truly a sight to behold, yes? She loved you so much that she just had to come back from the grave to see you again. Your little sex puppet, your plaything, your home wrecker. She is ready to pleasure you as I command. Come, embrace her. She longs for your tender caress once more." Berdan backed away, shaking his head and shaking in fear. "Impossible. You could not have such power." His voice was fear, faced with a monster that for him no sword could vanquish. The voice from the puppet laughed. "Of course not. This is the power of the Horde. You should know it well, that there are no limits but what our dark dreams take shape. You should have taken advantage of it when you had the chance, but now it is my province, not yours. Still, I give you your adulteress, a present from me to you in honor of your long dead—" "No!" Berdan interrupted and stepped back, physically, mentally trying to stay out of reach of the memory of whatever this girl had meant to him. The body of the girl struggled to her feet and lifted her sword once more. She said in the guttural halting more familiar and fitting to her form. "Your heart. He'll set me free for your heart." Hope fled as I realized from the hungry fanged look in her eye, the angle of her blade, that this was no metaphor. She charged forward and Berdan made no conscious move to defend himself. His body raised the sword in perfect parries of the hunter's every strike, but I could see his eyes were vacant, his limbs being moved by years of proficiency and practice. But it was only a matter of time before reflex alone would tire his body without a soul to guide it. "Berdan, wake up! Defend yourself!" I shouted at him. Somehow I had to get him to snap out of this fugue, to somehow break through the body of some girl he had once been with, I guessed, that now stood between him and his goal. There had to be a way. "There is, but as you are, he won't hear you." The voice again, upping the ante from killing gardeners to killing walking corpses. "The answer is simple. You know how to reach it." The voice was right. Somewhere, in the heart of this translucent dragon body I wore in the winds of Farrakhan, I could feel a pulsing cord hanging from some far-off rampart. A string that pulled both ways. "One tug is all it takes, Terry. It has been waiting for so long." The voice licked its lips despite having no body in my mind. The duel carried on for perhaps another 30 seconds. Neither participant had the edge, but I could see Berdan was beginning to lose his grip on his blade. His parries slowed while the hunter maintained her focus on him. "He'll die. It may take a while, but without you, your help, he'll die." I shook my neck. If I could, I should. even though I honestly had no idea what this voice spoke of. "Just one tug, Terry. Hold on to your desires, your wishes, all the unexpressed things you've demanded of the universe, and pull on the string. You'll unleash the world of all your desires." So I grabbed. I pulled. The light was warm, cold, intangible, and solid. It burnt through my hands even though I didn't even truly touch it, but I could see the string stretching off into infinity. What plug was I pulling? What was I unleashing? "One swift tug," the voice had said. I didn't trust the voice, sick, hungry, somehow perverse in its desires, but only a dream. That's all it was. I was certain. I grabbed, held, and pulled. And the air around us filled with a battle cry that resembles how I would imagine Robert Plant would sing opera. And there was Orin, the most pathetic cavalry that could have saved the day, or so I thought. He charged at the hunter, sword drawn. She turned and neatly parried his blade, easily pulling it loose from his hand and sending it clattering to the asphalt. He smiled, desperation giving his face an energetic color, and backed away as she menaced him. As soon as he was a few feet away, she turned her gaze and her blade back to the comatose sleepwalker, dismissing the musician. He scooped up the sword and flung it at the back of the hunter. She spun, parried the blade without exertion, but her attention slightly open left her still enough for Orin to concentrate. The charred gold stone round his neck was in his hand, and glowed more brightly as he chanted in a language I would have no hope of pronouncing, even if I had 5 tongues. A beam of light pushed out from the heart of the stone and seeped into the body of the hunter, penetrating her pores and giving her the glow of the angels. "Yes, Terry," the voice said. "This was an easy wish to grant. The universe will give you whatever you want now. You don't even have to ask." The voice's laughter heralded the stiffening of the limbs of the girl before she fell to the earth. It wasn't possible. It was coincidence. It was just a dream. I was so certain. I was so wrong. I was not so different from Berdan when, in a state of passive stupor at what could not be, Orin grabbed his hand and pulled him down the road. "I don't know how long this will last. Hurry!" How had Orin come here? Chance? Orchestrating the failure of the coin toss before? How? Orin led Berdan down the road, eyes fixed not on the destination but the burning wreck of the town they were leaving. "You're going to get me out of this if I can keep you alive. That's the deal." He took Berdan's silence as agreement. The contract having been struck, the price not truly known, the puppets unsure if they were doll or puppeteer, or does it just go on forever? Marionettes all the way down. My mind died. What had I done? Nothing. It had to be nothing. It couldn't be anything. At most I had pulled a string on a puppet in my dream. "Yes," the voice said. "I like it when you keep telling yourself that. Do it more." Where was my pillow? Where were my earplugs? Why couldn't I turn back to the real world to escape? You have been listening to the spoken word version of The Horde by Patrick Scafido, a Storyteller Chronicles novel. Written, narrated, and produced by Patrick Scafido. Vocal direction, recording, and primary audio editing by Fabian Gonzalez. For more about the author, go to thousandheads.com or @thousandheads on Twitter. Find Fabian at youtube.com/Texas Tostada or Twitter @Texas Tostada. The opening theme is Temptress, and the closing theme is Veins, both by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. This audiobook is released under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. That means you are encouraged to share it freely, but you may not sell it or alter it without permission of the author. Thank you for listening. I'm Patrick Scafido, wishing you pleasant dreams until next time, or until you die, whichever happens last.